founding of Narnia. The lion was pacing to and fro about that empty land and singing his new song. It was softer and more lilting than the song by which he had called up the stars and the sun, a gentle, rippling music. And as he walked and sang, the valley grew green with grass. It spread out from the lion like a pool. It ran up the sides of the little hills like a wave. In a few minutes, Diggory came to the edge of the wood, and there he stopped. The lion was singing still, but now the song had once more changed. It was more like what we should call a tune, but it was also far wilder. It made you want to run and jump and climb. It made you want to shout. It made you want to rush at other people and either hug them or fight them. But what the song did to the two humans was nothing compared with what it was doing to the country. Can you imagine a stretch of grassy land bubbling like water in a pot? For that is really the best description of what was happening. In all directions it was swelling into humps. They were of very different sizes, some no bigger than molehills, some as big as wheelbarrows, two the size of cottages, and the humps moved and swelled till they burst, and the crumbled earth poured out of them, and from each hump there came out an animal. The moles came out just as you might see a mole come out in England. The panthers, leopards, and things of that sort sat down at once to wash the loose earth off their hind quarters, and then stood up against the trees to sharpen their front claws. Showers of birds came out of the trees. Butterflies fluttered. Bees got to work on the flowers as if they hadn't a second to lose. And now you could hardly hear the song of the lion. There was so much cawing, cooing, crowing, braying, neighing, baying, barking, lowing, bleating, and trumpeting. But though Diggory could no longer hear the lion, he could see him. He was so big and so bright that Diggory could not take his eyes off him. The other animals did not appear to be afraid. Indeed, at that very moment, Diggory heard the sound of hoofs from behind. A second later, the old cab horse trotted past him and joined the other beasts. The air had apparently suited him as well as it had suited Uncle Andrew. He no longer looked like the poor old slave he had been in London. He was picking up his feet and holding his head erect. And now, for the first time, the lion was quite silent. He was going to and fro among the animals, and every now and then he would go up to two of them, always two at a time, and touch their noses with his. He would touch two beavers among all the beavers, two leopards among all the leopards, one stag and one deer among all the deer, and leave the rest. Some sorts of animal he passed over altogether, but the pairs which he had touched instantly left their own kinds and followed him. At last he stood still, and all the creatures whom he had touched came and stood in a wide circle around him. The others whom he had not touched began to wander away. Their noises faded gradually into the distance. The chosen beasts who remained were now utterly silent, all with their eyes fixed intently upon the lion. The cat-like ones gave an occasional twitch of the tail, but otherwise all was still. For the first time that day, there was complete silence, except for the noise of running water. The lion, whose eyes never blinked, stared at the animals as hard as if he was going to burn them up with his mere stare, and gradually a change came over them. The smaller ones, the rabbits, moles, and such like, grew a good deal larger. The very big ones, you noticed it most with the elephants, grew a little smaller. Many animals sat up on their hind legs. Most put their heads on one side as if they were trying very hard to understand. The lion opened his mouth, but no sound came from it. He was breathing out a long, warm breath. It seemed to sway all the beasts as the wind sways a line of trees. Far overhead, from beyond the veil of blue sky which hid them, the stars sang again, a pure, cold, difficult music. Then there came a swift flash like fire, but it burned nobody, either from the sky or from the lion himself, and every drop of blood tingled in the children's bodies, and the deepest, wildest voice they had ever heard was saying, "Narnia, Narnia, Narnia, awake. Love, think, speak. Be walking trees. Be talking beasts. Be divine waters."
So
We're glad.
now
Yeah,
you
go
want-
ahead and read it. Yeah.
Okay. Genesis 1:24-25. Then God said, "Let the earth bring forth living creatures after their kind, cattle and creeping things, and beasts of the earth after their kind." And it was so. God made the beasts of the earth after their kind, and the cattle after their kind, and every creeping thing of the ground after its kind. And God saw that it was good.
Cora. Come on over.
Is it
James.
the second one?
Yeah.
Okay. Every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of the heavenly lights, who does not change like shifting shadows.
So then what I did was, and I made a little memory book to show you why he's named Indiana. This is a little book I did to summarize the story of Indy. So this is young Indiana Jones, and this actor, whose name escapes me at the moment, he recently played Nefarious in that film. So it's been years since he was this young, but he was a favorite of mine. And so, of course, Indiana Jones is an adventurer, and Indy is my co-adventurer. And also his middle name, Indiana Figaro. This is the Figaro car, and that plays into my life a little bit. It was advertised as the Back to the Future car back in '91 when they first released it, and so that I've ridden in one. That color, as a matter of fact, so that was special to me. And then we have Pinocchio's Figaro, which is another black and white kitty cat. So here's baby Indy. I used to call him Indy Windy, and no bigger than a shoe. And here I did his first year, I made a little Christmas calendar with kitten pictures. I still do like to watch my movies big screen if I'm able to. So you can see Indy at the very bottom. He's watching the movie too. He thought that was interesting. And then Miss Ortiz, I forget her first name, I'm sorry. Her mother's name is Linda. And they used to come over, and they were friends from church, and so they'd snuggle. And lots of people like to snuggle Indy. So she's a sample of the many girls who snuggled Indy and found comfort with him in their arms. Another Indy being himself, being his goofy self, climbing on stuff. And he liked being on camera, so he was okay to pose with me whenever I wanted him to pose with me. And even when I would be videotaping projects, he managed to find his way to be in the picture. And so here he is in Modesto and watching the birds. And it's a very pretty picture. I love that window that my parents built. And so there's many reasons why I like that picture, not just because of the cat. And then this picture I love as well. It has the bicycle. It has my favorite quote that I have on my wall, which says, "Life is not measured by the number of breaths we take, but by the moments that take our breath away." Yeah. And this one took my breath away. So adorable. He was holding onto my arm, and he was always a snuggler for the family. He was very particular about the family. He knew who the family was. And then here's, of course, being silly, being 20 pounds. And I took this picture on Florence Street not long before I moved away. We moved away up here to Alaska. So here's me at LAX, just me and Indy. So he was on the adventure with me. And when I took him out through security, because they want you to take your pet out of the carrier to walk them through the magnetometer, and I think that's what it's called. And so when I took him out, everyone in the space was looking at Indy. He was a star. And he traveled very well. He did it really good. And then he was upstairs during my construction phase, during my assembly and painting and decorating phase, so he enjoyed being on the stairs. Even though he injured his tendons in both of his wrists eventually, he came to Alaska with an injured wrist, so he'd kind of walk on his wrist instead of his paws. Of course, he loves to be on my lap. That's his favorite spot. And I took a picture thinking that it would show people the scale of the clock, but because of the size of my cat, it actually makes the clock look smaller than it is, I think. So that's pretty funny. And then we have the signs DVD that I dug up in the backyard, and I just was going to take a picture of it to show people on Facebook. And Indy happened to be right behind it, and he glanced up at just the right moment, as he often does. This is my point of view. I live next to an airport, and then this is my favorite. This is his hero glamour shot. Just looking very Hollywood right there on my Harry Potter pillow. I forget when I took that, but it doesn't matter. And then there's a symbol of where he is. He's in the Stargate, and he was the gift from God. And that's why I celebrate him. I'm giving him back to God. And so that's the purpose of doing the burial and doing all this. This is a celebration of what God gave me for 17 years. As a single woman, it matters. So, back to the regular show.
Farewell to Shadowlands. Further up and further in, roared the unicorn, and no one held back. They charged straight at the foot of the hill and then found themselves running up it almost as water from a broken wave runs up a rock out at the point of some bay. Though the slope was nearly as steep as the roof of a house, and the grass was smooth as a bowling green, no one slipped. Only when they had reached the very top did they slow up. That was because they found themselves facing great golden gates. And for a moment none of them was bold enough to try if the gates would open. But while they were standing thus, a great horn, wonderfully loud and sweet, blew from somewhere inside that walled garden, and the gates swung open. Tyrion stood holding his breath and wondering who would come out. And what came was the last thing he had expected. A little, sleek, bright-eyed, talking mouse with a red feather stuck in a circlet on its head, and its left paw resting on a long sword. It bowed, a most beautiful bow, and said in its shrill voice, "Welcome, in the lion's name. Come further up and further in." Then Tyrion saw King Peter and King Edmund and Queen Lucy rush forward to kneel down and greet the mouse. And they all cried out, "Reep-a-cheep!" And Tyrion breathed fast with the sheer wonder of it, for now he knew that he was looking at one of the great heroes of Narnia, Reep-a-cheep the mouse, who had fought at the great battle of Baruna and afterwards sailed to the world's end with King Caspian the seafarer. But before he had much time to think of this, he felt two strong arms thrown about him and felt a bearded kiss on his cheeks and heard a well-remembered voice saying, "What, lad? Art thicker and taller since I last touched thee?" It was his own father, the good King Erlion. Jewel thought to himself, "I will leave them to talk for a little, and then I will go and greet the good King Erlion. Many a bright apple has he given me when I was but a colt." But next moment he had something else to think of, for out of the gateway there came a horse so mighty and noble that even a unicorn might feel shy in its presence. A great winged horse. It looked a moment at the Lord Diggory and the Lady Polly, and neighed out, "What, cousins? And they both shouted, "Fledge! Good old Fledge!" and rushed to kiss it. But by now the mouse was again urging them to come in, so all of them passed him through the golden gates into the delicious smell that blew toward them out of that garden and into the cool mixture of sunlight and shadow under the trees, walking on springy turf that was all dotted with white flowers. The very first thing which struck everyone was that the place was far larger than it had seemed from the outside. But no one had time to think about that, for people were coming up to meet the newcomers from every direction. Everyone you had ever heard of, if you knew the history of these countries, seemed to be there. There was Glimfeather the owl, and Puddleglum the marshwiggle, and King Rillian the disenchanted, and his mother the star's daughter, and his great father Caspian himself. And close beside him were the Lord Drinian, and the Lord Byrne, and Trumpkin the dwarf, and Trufflehutter the good badger, with Glenstorm the centaur, and 100 other heroes of the great war of deliverance. And then from another side came Cor, the king of Archenland, with King Lune, his father, and his wife Queen Erebus, and the brave Prince Corin Thunderfist, his brother, and Bree the horse, and Hwin the mare. And then, which was a wonder beyond all wonders to Tyrion, there came from further away in the past the 2 good beavers, and Tumnus the fawn. And there was greeting and kissing and handshaking, and old jokes revived. You've no idea how good an old joke sounds when you take it out again after a rest of 500 or 600 years. And the whole company moved forward to the center of the orchard, where the phoenix sat in a tree and looked down upon them all. And at the foot of that tree were 2 thrones, and in those 2 thrones a king and queen so great and beautiful that everyone bowed down before them. And well they might, for these 2 were King Frank and Queen Helen, from whom all the most ancient kings of Narnia and Archenland are descended. And Tyrion felt as if you would feel if you were brought before Adam and Eve in all their glory. About half an hour later, or it might have been 100 years later, for time there is not like time here, Lucy stood with her dear friend, her oldest Narnian friend, the fawn Tumnus, looking down over the wall of that garden and seeing all Narnia spread out below. But when you looked down, you found that this hill was much higher than you had thought. It sank down with shining cliffs thousands of feet below them, and trees in that lower world looked no bigger than grains of green salt. Then she turned inward again and stood with her back to the wall and looked at the garden. "I see," she said at last thoughtfully. "I see now. This garden is like the stable. It is far bigger inside than it was outside." "Of course, daughter of Eve," said the fawn. "The further up and further in you go, the bigger everything gets. The inside is larger than the outside." Lucy looked hard at the garden and saw that it was not really a garden, but a whole world, with its own rivers and woods and sea and mountains. But they were not strange. She knew them all. "I see," she said. "This is still Narnia, and more real and more beautiful than the Narnia down below, just as it was more real and more beautiful than the Narnia outside the stable door. I see. World within world, Narnia within Narnia." "Yes," said Mr. Tumnus, "like an onion, except that as you continue to go in and in, each circle is larger than the last." And Lucy looked this way and that, and soon found that a new and beautiful thing had happened to her. Whatever she looked at, however far away it might be, once she had fixed her eyes steadily on it, it became quite clear and close, as if she were looking through a telescope. She could see the whole southern desert, and beyond it the great city of Teshbon. To eastward she could see Cair Paravel on the edge of the sea, and the very window of the room that had once been her own. And far out to sea she could discover the islands, islands after islands to the end of the world, and beyond the end the huge mountain which they had called Aslan's country. But now she saw that it was part of a great chain of mountains which ringed round the whole world. In front of her it seemed to come quite close. Then she looked to her left and saw what she took to be a great bank of brightly colored cloud cut off from them by a gap. But she looked harder and saw that it was not a cloud at all, but a real land. And when she had fixed her eyes on one particular spot of it, she at once cried out, "Peter, Edmund, come and look, come quickly." And they came and looked, for their eyes had also become like hers. "Why," exclaimed Peter, "it's England! And that's the house itself, Professor Kirk's old home in the country where all our adventures began." "I thought that house had been destroyed," said Edmund. "So it was," said the fawn. "But you are now looking at the England within England, the real England, just as this is the real Narnia. And in that inner England, no good thing is destroyed.